5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
So, to kick things off for today's proceedings, we have our very own Terry Slavin, Editor, Ethical Corporation by Reuters Events, talking with Andrew Morlett, CEO of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, on the big challenge of delivering a circular ambitions in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. Over to you, Terry.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning to Andrew. It's good to see you again, even if virtually. It's a real privilege to be able to kick off today's event and talking about the very important subject of delivering a circular economy post-COVID-19. Coincidentally, this is a topic that we've been tackling this month in the magazine. So hopefully I'm going to be well prepared to be able to interview you about this. But also just to the viewers, please do put your questions to Andrew through Slido, and we'll get to those as they come in a bit later. Andrew, I'd like to start by asking you the question we pose on our cover, and that's, will the circular economy survive COVID-19? We've seen huge amounts of PPE that have been generated, a return to single-use cups rather than disposable cups at chains like Starbucks and Pret a Manger. You've got states, California, Oregon, lifting their plastic bag bans. Greenpeace is warning of ecological disaster if restaurants are going to reopen only using plastic tableware. So it's clear that the single-use plastics battle has been dealt a serious setback. So how serious is it, and can we rebound?
Thanks, Terry. I think the first observation would be to make that the pandemic has had an effect across all sorts of topics and issues. I think from the circular economy perspective, I think it's important to remember that the circular economy is a much bigger idea than just plastics recycling as such and waste. The circular economy is really about designing system solutions that eliminate waste from the system. So there's a very strong upstream agenda here as well that needs to be taken into account. And I think it's very understandable that right now people are very concerned about healthcare and the COVID-19 viral crisis that we're having. And people are concerned about that, and we are going to see an uptake of single-use plastics through this moment, and obviously with the PPE issues. But I think this is a moment and it will pass, and that the bigger issues associated with plastics absolutely aren't going away. And really, we need to get back to the basics here, which is that plastics are an incredibly useful material, and we need to find ways of using it in such a way that it stays in the system, and we capture the value of it and keep it in circulation, keep it in use, and don't allow it to enter into the natural environment where it becomes a major problem.
But there's been the additional, not only are there the hygiene issues, there's this other issues about the price of virgin plastic coming down. Yeah. And you've seen that HDPE prices have fallen almost by half, polypropylene by 2/3. So isn't that a huge barrier as well?
Yeah, I mean the economics of the system were problematic before that, and the lower prices that we're seeing right now absolutely make it more challenging. But I think that the recognition that the volume of plastics that we're producing and placing on the market every single day of the year, billions and billions of pieces of plastics, single-use plastics are being put on the market, and these are creating a tremendous amount of waste. It's accumulative, it's persistent, it represents its own health challenges actually, and it's going to have devastating effects on all sorts of aspects of the economy if we don't address this issue. And I think that we absolutely have to get to the root cause of the major imbalance in the entire system, which is the difference between the raw material prices and the recyclate prices. And that's going to require a really concerted effort by the actors in the system who are putting this material on the market to find ways of getting the economics to work, and that in harmony with better policy, or policies that also address that imbalance, that perhaps create a situation where we can subsidise the creation of better collection infrastructure and actually incentivise better design for reuse and for the elimination of plastics out of the unnecessary parts of the fractions. So it's going to be a combination of things that actually address this. But I would just make the point that, you know, we work with well over 800 companies and organisations who are absolutely committed to a new approach to plastics as a system that can work, and that these organisations have recommitted. Many of them have recommitted and contacted us. We've had no people calling us saying that because of the pandemic we're moving away from this vision and from this commitment. So I think that there is a very strong and, you know, really quite powerful set of forces here that are bigger than the pandemic, in fact, and we're going to see this moment in time of the pandemic move through, and we're going to see us get back to the question of how do we create a system that keeps the materials in flow, and we're going to have to look at issues that work against that, such as the raw material prices and the imbalanced market that we have today.
So I know you're working with the big, obviously you're working with the big brands. It may be more challenging for the small and medium companies, especially that are having to, you know, worry about their own survival.
Yeah. Well, I think it's true for a number of the big players as well, that there's some tremendous economic challenges that we've got right now with the pandemic. But we work with large players, but we also work with a tremendous number of smaller players as well. There's a very strong commitment from smaller players who are innovating really quite radically to introduce new types of delivery systems and new types of plastic formats and designs. We can see that there are opportunities for innovation that really start to meet people's needs better. I mean, what we need to do is be designing solutions for people that they can work with easily. And we can see a lot of the smaller companies and organizations innovating quite dramatically in that space, or very productively in that space. And, you know, I think that they're getting picked up as well by larger players, and they're being watched closely. There's a lot of digital innovation occurring that starts to connect digital capabilities with the shopping needs and buying needs of people, so that they can actually understand where better solutions exist, and they can understand how to get these delivered through virtual means in different formats. So concentrates and single-use bottles, I mean, not single-use, you buy one bottle and you get the concentrates delivered to you through your postal service or by the delivery people, and you manage your needs digitally online, and that can be a very effective way to meet a person's need. You don't have to go to the shops, you don't have to lug home gallons and gallons of water, which is very heavy for detergents and bigger items, and you can have one good bottle that you keep and just drop a concentrate into it. So I think there's a lot of these types of design innovations emerging that play to large players and small players, and we're seeing that there's a tremendous take up in this space at the moment.
And Terracycle's loop system, the reusable packaging, that's launching in the UK this year as planned. So they haven't rolled back on that.
No, and I think there are many examples like Terracycle emerging that we can see, and we've seen them all around the world actually. And these are solutions that people want. I think there's a tremendous amount of frustration by many people who actually are frustrated by the fact that they can't escape plastics. It's they come back from the supermarket with everything wrapped in plastics, and they're not happy with that. They don't know what to do with it. They would like better solutions, and I think people like Loop and others are actually listening to this, and they're innovating very hard to provide alternatives that people really want.
And does PPE have to be single use? I think in the UK, I know that when there was an absolute inability to get PPE, they were reusing things that were supposed to be single use.
Yeah, I think that, look, the amount of single-use and disposability that exists in the healthcare system has been there, building up over the years. Everybody's been aware of it. The pandemic has really brought it into stark focus. For many, many years, we had all sorts of reusable systems in hospitals where things are sterilized and put back into the wards and into the hospital system very safely. There are microbial plastics. There are all sorts of solutions that can be developed. I think that the pandemic has caught people off guard. I mean, we've had a tremendous demand for PPE right now, and it's shown that there is a chronic waste problem in the healthcare system, and there is also a challenge with the supply chains. And I think the pandemic has also demonstrated the brittlety of a global supply chain model that is optimized on just-in-time efficiencies, as opposed to really looking at a more resilient and perhaps a more localized model that actually can keep materials in use and in the system, and also address needs better. And I think that the ventilators was another example, and there are plenty of other examples where we've seen the right to repair and the need to be able to keep these the devices in the system, and having local stocks or regional stocks that we can move around to where the needs are, as opposed to everything being disposable and globally sourced.
Okay, we're starting to get some questions coming in, which reinforces, one of them reinforcing looking beyond plastics. So where are the other areas in the circular economy space where there have been reversals? I would think fashion has to be one of the really key areas where there's been a huge amount of waste generated through this.
Yeah, enormous amount of waste. And again, this was a problem that pre-existed the pandemic. We've had a lot of issues with out of season stock and stock burning, and huge buildups of inventory and stocks that brands don't know what to do with, and that has been a pre-existing challenge. We've got a fundamental business model issue with fashion that is really based on this very high-speed turnover and throughput of clothing that has potentially a lower quality and lower durability. So we're seeing clothes almost becoming a disposable item, and if not single use, very few uses. So people have a tremendous amount of clothing in their closets, more than we've ever had historically. Each item is being worn less, and then it is being disposed of largely into landfill and incineration. So the fashion sector and industry, as we pointed out in our work over the last couple of years, has been a massively challenged industry, and it's becoming less profitable now as well. This business model has sort of run its course in many ways. So again, I think that what the pandemic has done has really amplified these pre-existing issues and created an even more observable challenge in those sectors that were already needing to radically transform. So fashion, I think, is one that is needing to work very hard on innovating new ways of redesigning its business model, but looking at its material sources and really designing more for durability, so less better clothing that you can keep longer and repair and actually pass on and keep in the system rather than have it wasted.
Well, that's certainly what we've seen with, say, Gucci, which was one of these 500 companies that wrote an open letter saying, we have to change the way we do things. We have to not sell as much and be more focused on sustainability. And
Right.
Actually, we're going to be talking to Karen later on. But I'm sure Marie Claire will be talking about that. But
I'd make the distinction though between sustainability efforts that just incrementally reduce the harm of a system that doesn't work. So you might lower the impact of a linear clothing system, but I think what we're talking about is a radical redesign of the system, so that we're actually thinking about the elimination of waste through design and not just the incremental reduction of it as a sustainability effort. I think that's really important to keep in mind.
So, so jeans redesign is one of those examples, isn't it?
Yeah. And jeans redesign has had a very strong pickup. We wanted to work with the industry on an iconic clothing item and really look at the ways in which that could be thought of from a design perspective. So, how do we design jeans that have greater durability? So, how many washes can we actually, how many times can we wear them and use them and keep them in use? How do we think about the way in which they're produced and the materials that are used to produce them, so that at the end of use that they can be disassembled and parts of them, you could recut good denim into other products, or in fact recycle it back into a denim again. And we've had a very strong pickup on this, and we see this model of really thinking about the durability and the design of clothing so that it can be in use longer and kept in the system, applying across many other parts of the clothing wardrobe as well.
And I guess besides products, there's also business models, aren't there, in terms of how clothing is?
Yeah, no, I think there are many examples in fashion now that are emerging that are really interesting. I mean, the Real Real is a good example of a company that resells and takes on consignment high quality clothing, and has created a very successful online model for that, but also has stores that it's opened in really premium locations as well for high quality clothing. So that's a very nice example. But there are many others as well in America and in Europe. We're seeing others, and in China as well. We've got a very high e-commerce environment in China that people are perhaps not as aware of. But there are business like Y Closet, which has a very large customer base, millions of customers who are leasing clothing, and actually, a very clever digitally enabled model that allows them to basically refresh their wardrobes on a regular basis without having to fill their wardrobes with clothes they don't wear and then waste them.
So some of the questions we're getting is when revenue streams of most businesses are being impacted, what's your realistic advice for them to continue their investment in sustainability initiatives? Where's the best place to put if you've got limited funds?
Well, I think that again, I'd make the distinction between transforming your business model and the business to incremental sustainability efforts. Those are clearly important. We need to reduce the harm of what we're doing now, but essentially, companies that are making the transition to a circular economy need to invest in this over time, and you need to start to look at the ways in which you can design new business models and better products, and start to look at your relationships with your supply chain, your suppliers, the ecosystem within which you're working. So how can you get products back? So these are not typically quick wins, but there are many examples of innovation efforts that large and small companies are doing that are starting to get them on that journey, and they're starting to get very quick feedback from their customers that yes, this is what they want to see more of it, and they want to engage in these things because they are better product solutions for people. And it's not about a trade-off of more expensive or lower quality products and services. This is really an innovation agenda which says, how could we deliver better solutions for you, better system solutions for you that actually get you into a position where the more business you do and the more success you have as a business demonstrates that you're part of the solution to global challenges that we have, whether it's the accumulation of waste or whether it's climate change, because many companies are looking at how they can actually participate in climate change, and they're looking at their energy sourcing and their efficiency. But about 45% of the solution space actually exists in their products, the way that they make them, their supply chains. And that's an important space that, again, talks directly to customers and what they're looking for these days.
And do you think customers, particularly, I'm thinking in fashion, people are going to think, well, actually, I haven't had to I haven't spent anything on wardrobe. I haven't had to spend anything on wardrobe. That's quite nice not to have to spend money on clothes. That I mean, now in the future, if more people are going to be working from home, they're not going to need the same kind of spending.
Well, I think right now, many people are commenting on the fact that people have had the opportunity to reflect a bit on their consumptive patterns and what they're spending money on. And they're also sitting in their homes, looking around their homes, cleaning out their cupboards. A lot of that is going on, and it's not something we've surveyed or monitored closely, but it's certainly indicative. It's certainly qualitatively we're hearing a lot of it. So I think that we are also seeing, we are seeing behaviour change. We're seeing a tremendous shift to online shopping and online buying, and whether that pervades to what extent post-lockdown, it's going to be interesting to track. But we are seeing people's behaviours shift, and we are seeing anecdotal evidence of people's values starting to be questioned. So I think this is really interesting, and I think that we will see people looking for different solutions. And we announced last week that we are partnering with IKEA, for example, and this was a really interesting partnership for us. We work with about over 1,500 companies around the world through our various programs, but IKEA is particularly interesting. It has a huge reach, and they are very design oriented. And I think what's really nice about this partnership is we're starting to bring the circular economy right into people's homes. So, how can we offer people solutions for homewares and the things that they're currently sitting amongst and spending a lot of time with that are much more circular economic solutions? So, better materials, repairability, upgradability, business models where you can actually rent things or take long-term leases, but they go back to the supplier afterwards, and then they can repurpose and recover and remanufacture, etc. So I think all of these things are going to get a lot more attention, but none of us really know what's going to happen over the next 6, 12 near term, given the economic challenges. But what we are seeing is that these ideas, the circular economy models, are really very, very relevant. They offer new solutions, they offer new forms of growth, they offer more localism in many ways with these business models, and they seem to be lining up very nicely with people's values and how they're changing.
And I guess food, we haven't talked about food, but that is another area that you have circular models for food systems.
Well, food is hugely important and really underappreciated because it plays an incredibly large role in the climate agenda, and we have a massively extractive food industry today where we source food from all around the world. We wrap it in plastic, we ship it on aeroplanes, and we actually end up with food that we don't know the provenance of. We don't really know the nutritional value of it. We don't know how long it's been packaged for and how long it's been in the supply chain before we get to eat it. And we know that the increase in meat consumption, the loss of forestry biodiversity, the use of petrochemical fertilizers and insecticides, all of these things have had a tremendous uptick in the last several years. We're getting most of the food consumption now in cities, so all of the nutrients that are packed into food end up now coming from everywhere and getting concentrated in cities and then just lost from the system. We flush it, or we burn it, or we landfill it. And there's a tremendous amount of waste from end to end, from farm to fork, and a tremendous expenditure of energy and an absolutely chronic loss of nutrients and potential value from that system. So we need to find ways of starting to reconnect these systems. And I think that the trend towards more localism, the use of the growing of more food closer to where it's consumed, so that we can then have the possibility of actually capturing the byproducts of food production and consumption in cities and connecting it back to more local food systems is important. And we also know that the pandemic has actually thrown up a number of questions about the supply chain fragility. Fortunately, the industry, the food industry, has been able to reconfigure, at a tremendous pace, and we haven't seen the food shortages and challenges to date that we could have had. But we are sort of seeing that there are questions about our ability to get crops out of fields and to transport those internationally when supply chains are in fact challenged in the way that they are today. So it's a really important topic, and we think that this is something with fashion and plastics and durable goods, mobility. These are all topics that the circular economy can play a tremendous role in to start to shift.
And you mentioned mobility, like the auto industry, and
yeah, I think that mobility, and again we're seeing, interestingly, we're seeing the auto industry hugely challenged, of course, and many governments around the world are now sort of stepping in to help with emergency funding, and some of this is now conditional, that there is a shift in transforming the industry to a more climate neutral or energy efficient model, an EV and multimodal type thinking. So I think that the trend is very strong. I mean, that was already moving very strongly before the pandemic. Now that the industry is so challenged, and I think we're coming out the other side, it is a real opportunity to take the opportunity to retool and to transform as we come out the back of this and come out stronger with much greater momentum towards better systems that meet, the challenge of moving people, not just putting cars, petrochemical cars on the street.
And it's that connection with the climate crisis. Isn't there one statistic about all the PP that's been that's incinerated is actually enough to creates enough carbon emissions to as 186 coal-fired power plants or something. So there's a real connection between climate action and circular economy, isn't there?
Well, I think that, I think the point you're making is that the crisis has naturally focused people on the immediate healthcare needs that we have had to react to. And this is a situation that we've never had before at a scale we've never had before in history. And, therefore, I think that that's one issue. The connection with the circular economy, all of the things that we have been talking about coming into the pandemic, as I said, have just been exacerbated and amplified by that. And the real opportunity is to actually learn from what we have experienced and come out the other side and create better growth opportunities, and to reinvest now in system solutions that, are better all round. I mean, they need to be more resilient, not just from a energy perspective, but also in a societal perspective, and in an ecological perspective, a biodiversity, so that's a much more rounded conversation. And I think that, the pandemic has really pointed to many interconnections that we haven't really been as aware of before. It's really highlighted that, there's many connections here that just sort of sit below the surface. And when you have a crisis like we've just had, they become immediately apparent. And there are many, many more of those that we can address through better systems design and solutioning for people that, do take into account circular economic principles.
I guess a more immediate and practical concern is raised by one question about how a lot of recycling in cities was impacted by the COVID-19. How do you avoid that kind of interruption in the future?
Well, I mean, I think that, again, the recycling industry was massively challenged before the pandemic. I mean, the series of events that have occurred over the last year or so with many international markets for recycled material closing their borders, have created a huge challenge. The lowering of oil prices, as you mentioned, has created a huge challenge. So this was already a massive problem coming into the crisis. The crisis just layered over the top of that a massive PPE and healthcare disposability agenda over the top of it. all of these things need to be addressed, and we know what the solutions are. We know that we can create a better system through innovation for eliminating the plastics in the system we don't need, and there's loads and loads of plastics we don't need, keeping the plastics that we do need in circulation, and innovating for greater reuse and for better business models that keep materials in use much longer. And that vision doesn't change. We need to now come out of the pandemic and invest in ways that get that resilient, better model in place quicker.
That's great. Sounds like a great note to end. Unfortunately, we've come to an end, and I have to hand it back to you, Liam. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Very welcome.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Terry. What an interesting discussion and great way to kick off today's discussion. And to those that have been submitting the questions through Slido, we've already had a number of great questions come up, so do continue in that vein. You'll see Slido at the bottom half of the screen, or visit slido.com and then use the hashtag RBSVirtual to start submitting your questions. As Terry also highlighted, we've also just published a full issue focus looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the circular economy. So do visit ethicalcorp.com, where you'll be able to access the magazine for free. Okay, so next up we have Saka Nusebar, CEO of International at Federated Hermes, with a 15-minute presentation followed by a 15-minute Q&A on mainstreaming ESG. Those taken to Twitter and LinkedIn do share the insights using hashtag RBSVirtual. But for now, here's Saka's presentation.